So we were in Florida and talking about your time in Tampa. Do you want to continue where you left off?
Sure. Uh, One of the things I didn't mention before is that in 1946, my other sister, Carolyn Brandy, was born. She is my half sister. Her father is George Brandy, who at that time was my mother's husband. And so in Florida then we had three kids in the family. And I continued in junior high school. Uh, but then in about 1949, there was a big hurricane that came to Tampa and wiped out my stepfather's flying school. And that was the end of that. And at that point, my mother and George decided that George should rejoin the Army. And so he did, and he was a cook. That was what he had been in the Army in the Second World War. And so he was a sergeant, a master sergeant in the Army as a cook. And he was assigned to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. So we again moved. We left Tampa in our very nice neighborhood, a very fancy house, where, by the way, I had a boxer dog who got bit by a rattlesnake. But anyway, we moved then to El Paso, and we lived for the first time in my life in accommodations that had dirt floors and outdoor plumbing. We had not succeeded in life very well, so we were reduced to rather straightened circumstances.
So you had dirt floor in El Paso.
El Paso in a dirt floor with outdoor plumbing, or outdoor facilities.
Outhouses.
And so I was then in ninth grade in El Paso High School, and that lasted only a few months. And then my father was assigned to Fort Meade in Maryland, outside of Washington, somewhere between Baltimore and Washington. And we lived in a town called Crownsville, which was on the Severn Peninsula, where the Severn River enters Chesapeake Bay, very near Annapolis. And so we lived in Crownsville. I entered 10th grade. Well, actually, I went first we must not have lived in Crownsville first. We must have lived in Glen Burnie, which is another town near Fort Meade, because my 10th grade was in Glen Burnie High School. And I had a biology teacher, Mr. Manspeaker, who encouraged me in my interest in biology. And so I, from that point on, decided to be a biologist. And I soon decided to become a biochemist. But we moved then from Glen Burnie to Crownsville, which I mentioned before. And I went to Anne Arundel Junior-Senior High School. Anne Arundel is the name of the county that Crownsville is in. And Anne Arundel Junior-Senior High School was basically an agricultural high school. And I was one of 9 academic students in a class of 63, most of whom were members of the Future Farmers of America. And so I had a middling experience in high school. And I think, although I probably was a fairly bright student inherently, I think that the struggle with my sexuality really was a real impediment to my concentrating on, doing what I ought to be doing, like studying and learning and so on.
Do you think it impacted you differently than other teenagers also dealing with their own quote-unquote normal sexuality?
Well, I think that all teenagers probably struggle but maybe I'm wrong, but I think that my lack of achievement, as I see it, was due to the fact that I was always trying not to be gay. I mean, it was really not a matter of, celebrating my gayness, but to be saying, please let me be not gay. And that was a struggle. And that was, taking up a lot of my energy. And so that was not a good aspect of this. But, I managed okay. And during that time, I contracted pneumonia. And at the age of 15, I had pneumonia. And I was very sick for a very long time. As I look back on my life, it's clear that the most vulnerable part of my system are my lungs. And of course, by the age of 15, I'd taken up smoking, which of course was the worst thing possible I could have done. But I did it because it was, it was adult and sophisticated and everybody did it and blah, blah. But anyway, so I had a very bad case of pneumonia. I took penicillin and that helped cure it, but it made me allergic to penicillin. So anyway, that was that. And I then began applying to college, and I ended up going to Johns Hopkins and majoring in biology. And that was, a good experience. I still felt very much an outsider. And I think you have to remember that back then being gay was not something that anybody ever admitted to. You hid it. And so it was not something that you could really talk about. And there was no internet. There was no way of really discovering that there were lots of other people like you. And especially since I didn't want to be that way, it was very difficult. And so that's what I remember basically about both high school and college, is that I was struggling with that. The first summer, between my freshman and sophomore years, I went back to Houghton. I had never been in Houghton. Okay. So I'll tell you about Houghton later.